Well, hello and welcome to Hiring for Good podcast. I'm Tanis Morris with Acumen Executive Search, and as usual, with me is my lovely co-host, Suzanne Hanifin.
Well, welcome. Thank you, Tanis.
We are honored to have with us today Dr. Smriti Agrawal, who is a seasoned scientist turned entrepreneur with over 10 years experience in developing and commercializing innovative medical technology solutions. With a strong focus on go-to-market strategies, Smriti has successfully navigated the regulatory and reimbursement pathways, driven market adoption, accelerated revenue growth, and optimized product positioning in the global healthcare landscape. With a Ph.D. in molecular human genetics from Baylor College of Medicine and a background in medical devices and therapeutics, Dr. Agrawal brings a unique blend of scientific expertise and strategic acumen to drive innovation and shape the future of patient care. As the co-founder of a pioneering medical device startup, Lazarus 3D, Dr. Agrawal has led the organization from early stage development through commercialization, achieving rapid market penetration both domestically and internationally. She has a proven track record in launching new products, expanding into new markets, and securing over $11 million in VC and non-dilutive funding. Her expertise in healthcare innovation has been recognized in major media outlets, including CNN, CBS, Business Insider, NPR, and more. Dr. Agrawal's persistence, passion, dedication to innovation and patience, and commitment to creating positive change in medicine have revolutionized surgical planning, ultimately improving patient outcomes and transforming the future of healthcare. Smriti is also an advocate for entrepreneurship. She's an active community and industry volunteer and is widely recognized as a leading light in entrepreneurial voices in medtech in the region. Smriti, Dr. Agrawal, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tanis. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
To be here.
Yes, I've been very much looking forward to this. I think you have such a fascinating story. We always begin by asking our guests to just kind of sketch out how they got into leadership. And your story is particularly compelling. If you don't mind, we would love for you to share your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So early childhood, I was born in India. I grew up in Mumbai and always was in the shadows of my family that had they ran a family business there. And I would go, to trade shows with them. I designed the logo for the family business. And I was always excited to see that hustle and bustle of like that upcoming event or, opportunity, whatever was happening. And even though I was a child at the time, I would still see, my parents and my uncles negotiate or do whatever, I guess had to be done to get the job done, right? So that was my early childhood. From there, when I moved to the U.S., my dad got a job in the U.S. Here, I was the new kid. And so I had to create my own path to, getting, that building those bonds and like sort of starting over. And I think that's why when we talk about immigrants, there is like that unique element of them when they are here and what they do with their lives. It's always interesting and it's always inspiring. So when I moved here, I grew up half of my life here, then moved to Houston for school. So that's where my career started, I guess. I was at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, focusing on my Ph.D. in genetics. And at the same time, somebody had asked me, hey, why don't you consider the MD PhD route? And so from there, I had to make this decision. I ended up going into a lot of surgeries and observing how people train and how, people are treated, how patients are treated, and identified a gap there. So that sparked a host of ideas in me and I created those opportunities for myself that have paved the path to where I am today.
Yeah, you mentioned these gaps. Kind of fill in what were the gaps and.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first, encounter it's a funny story. It was a fellow on the shuttle one day from Baylor who had talked about how he had operated on a bell pepper. And exactly. And I thought it was funny and I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. Surgeons early in their careers, when they're learning, often train on fruits and vegetables or cadavers, but can't really operate on cadavers. So in this particular example, he had removed seeds from the bell pepper using a surgical robot. And to me, I was just baffled and very shocked that this was now going to translate to, actual patient procedure, right? And so I asked him if there was an intermediary in between those two. And he said, yes, of course. We observe lots of cases, dozens of procedures he would observe or even assist in the OR. So I was like, okay, well, that's really fascinating because if I just observe somebody do surgery, I don't think I would feel comfortable.
Well, and as a potential patient going from bell pepper seeds to my brain.
Right. And I asked him that and I was like, how comfortable are you doing this transition? Are you really completely good to go on your first case? And he's like, no, the first case is, there's so much on the line and it is frightening and they are nervous, but it's not just the first case. It's dozens of cases. And in some instances, it could be hundreds of cases. And really, if you look at statistics, in some procedures, for example, kidney cancer, treatment for kidney cancer where they remove the tumor itself, the learning curve is 300 cases. So that's to go from starting out to achieving competency. And then furthermore, additional cases to go from competency to excellency, right? And so it can take years, and it does. And I was just asking myself the whole time, I was like, well, there has to be a better way.
And yeah, no, this is amazing because, again, it's scary to think that that way because you look at your physician and you go, they are the expert. But like all of us, it is a learning, we go through that evolution of learning. And looking back, again, going from Ph.D., M.D., into entrepreneurship, besides these aha moments of there's a recognized gap, share with us some other formative experiences, whether it's with a mentor and how you were able to make that transition.
Yeah. So this, like I said, it was one instance. And then actually I decided not to go to medical school for those reasons and others. But in life in general, everything we do we're always learning, right? And it's through experience that we grow. So for me, early on, I had a really phenomenal mentor, my PI, my boss at Baylor. And I asked him, and I was like, hey, I was considering going to medical school, like doing an MD, PhD, but I have identified this gap, and I think I may have some ideas that I want to pursue. And I don't want it to be, a conflict between my work at Baylor and this other thing that I want to do. And he was really, I loved his response. And he was like, well, this is a place for you to learn, right? And you can explore whatever opportunities you create for yourself or opportunities that come your way, as long as it doesn't interfere with the work that you're doing, your thesis work. And so I was really passionate about both. And I was really happy and relieved to hear that advice from him. And that was at the beginning of my journey. And through those years, I spent 4 years at Baylor working in therapeutics. So first it was diagnostics, focusing on neurodegenerative conditions that are inherited. And these are rare neurodegenerative conditions that lead to blindness in kids and young adults. It's progressive. So I focused on the diagnostic aspect of it. And then I did animal studies to validate those targets that we were identifying in my lab. And then from there, we progressed to therapeutics. So using gene therapy tools to basically create treatments for patients that have these conditions. So I was doing this thing. I was really passionate about it. At the same time, I was also building my company, Lazarus 3D. And at the end of this journey, well, at the end of my PhD, when it was time to leave, I asked my boss the same question. And I was like, hey, I've been really passionate about the work that I have done here. And I know that there are so many opportunities to pursue this further in the biotech space, especially at that time it was booming. And I mean, it still is, still in its infancy. And then, however, I have created this company and I think it has a very bright future. So if I exit academia, do you think this is a good idea, to go on to build a startup? Would that, limit me? And he said, again, huge moment for me to hear this from him. And he said, you don't have to limit yourself for any reason, right? This life is limitless. There's so many opportunities. And if you feel passionate about the startup, you are young. So why not pursue it, take that risk? And 99% of startups fail. So he's like, if that happens, you would learn tremendously from it and you would bring so much value to whatever you do next. And so if then you decide you want to come back to academia, that's a very easy transition, right? And he's like, then you can just have both. Why limit yourself?
What great advice.
Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah. And I think that advice of, I look in my career and every time I've leapt, it's been amazing. And you take that chance and you kind of go for it because we learn so much from the road rash of falling down of that versus never falling. Mm-hmm. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that the mentor that you had in academia was really thinking about holistically about what you learn, outside of the lens of just what you're learning, for your PhD, but viewing life as an opportunity to learn and why not go for it? It's what I tell my kids, but kind of on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
but it's just I love that sensibility. As the founder of an organization, you were pretty young when you started everything. Did you go through intentional work to kind of identify your own personally held values and then think about the culture of the organization you were building? Or did that just kind of innately, there's different ways you kind of stumble into a startup or you kind of have to, how intentional were you or what ended up really resonating culturally within the company that you built that's kind of a part of who you are?
Yeah, I think it was always a part of who I am, being entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Right? Like I said, whatever my exposure was to the family business growing up definitely is something that shaped me, right? I was probably not aware of that at the time when it was happening. But as I was beginning my early career journey, I always had this strong sense of diversifying my efforts. And so not putting all of your eggs in one basket, right? So even when I was starting out, I actually had taken on mini projects. I had 4 or 5 going in parallel because at least in science, you never know when your project will fail and how long it will take to fail. And so I think it's always better to fail sooner than later, but that doesn't always pan out, right? So I always had multiple projects starting out. And I think I had just done it as a safety mechanism, right? Just to be prepared for failure. Not want it, not desire it, but anticipate the possibility of it. So to be cautiously optimistic. And I think all scientists are cautiously optimistic in life, no matter what they're doing. So that's always it has always been a part of me. And then to pursue Lazarus at a, parallel path in that journey was, I think, huge risk, but also a huge reward because of the impact. And I think the impact had always been a part of who I am too. Everything that I cared for and everything that I have committed to in life has always come from a place of care, right? So you talk about like why I mentor startups and why I volunteer and why I'm involved with those other organizations. It's because of the impact. And if I can make a difference in this other person's life, whether it's a patient or whether it's a mentee, I really care about that. So that impact has always been a part of, it's been a force. And with Lazarus 3D, of course, the vision is to improve patient safety and outcomes in surgical care, where every patient, even if that patient was me, we all deserve the best. And so enabling it and, driving it, pioneering technologies that really make it a reality was the mission and the impact of what came from within. It's the passion that drives you, and it's having that desire, that undying desire to just make it happen.
Yeah, and so as you're building this organization and growing the teams, let's talk to us about how you hire and those values, and how do you bring that in to continue with that culture and to grow an organization?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think hiring at a startup is such a difficult task, right, to do it right. And I don't think anyone ever does. I think everyone learns from their mistakes. And they're not really mistakes. I think it's just a learning curve. So you hire people initially, you're like, oh, you have the right skills, and you seem to be the right fit. You're entrepreneurial, and then you also hire based on what you can afford. And so I think that's where the learnings come from. And I have definitely gone through that journey and recognize now that whoever you hire, right, they may have been a fit at the time of hiring, but as you grow and acquire growing pains, you're going to have to also level and maybe reshuffle, right? So you may have to pivot from even what those criteria were, because now today the criteria is no longer what it used to be. Now the criteria is we want to hire the best people and the best and brightest people that are not only entrepreneurial, but also are committed like we are and passionate about what we're doing and know what their why is. Like, that's so important.
Yeah, we had a guest on Hiring for Good, and this is a couple months ago, who said you hire 70% of what you need today and 30% of what you need tomorrow. And that has stuck with me because if we all had a crystal ball, it would be easy to say this person's going to be able to evolve and grow with the organization.
Right.
But it's tough as a leader to make those decisions.
Well, and particularly in a startup environment where the skill set is so multifaceted. I mean, the necessity of a multifaceted, set of skills is really foundational to success. Yeah, and you have to have people who are flexible. But, then as you grow, sometimes those skills don't necessarily transfer to being able to effectively run one element of an organization, So that can be really tricky, I think, something that you learn. Before I get into kind of our next official question, I would love it if you could just kind of fill our audience in on what transpired with Lazarus, because we've talked about you starting this, and I know it's still a young company, but do you mind just kind of giving yourself a little pat on the back with the awards that you won and the traction that the product gained across the world?
So Lazarus is still a early stage company, right? Just disclaimer. But when it started, it was just a very small team, right? And it started out of my kitchen. So I was a student. I didn't have a lot of money. I invested all of my savings into the company to support it in the early days. And those were the most critical days, right? Because like I said, most startups wouldn't have made it through that initial hump. So we were able to grow and succeed at that juncture because even though the goal was to build a platform or a technology that surgeons would leverage as a tool to drive direct impact on patient care, I actually identified a secondary problem, which was equally as big, which is really as technologies are evolving, right, and new innovation is coming into healthcare, the medical device manufacturers, which are, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, are having to train the user, their customer, which is physicians, on how to, use their whatever device, right? And so what they were doing at that time, they were using chicken or they were using, grapes. Like the surgical robotics company they have had all these videos on how to operate on a grape, for example. And so I looked at that and I was like, why are they doing that, right? And then the alternative was the rep would go into the OR with the patient and the surgeon would also be there, obviously, and the rep would work with the surgeon in providing care for that patient with this new equipment, right? And
which again is kind of scary, but
right?
yes.
There's a liability burden there, right? As you would imagine, and nobody wants that. Like really, it was just not what anybody wanted, but it's what they had. So we created a parallel opportunity, which ended up becoming beneficial in many, many aspects of it, right? So first was training the teams for the medical device companies so that they knew, ins and outs of the technology, so that they were really informed on what they were selling. Then second was basically alleviating the pain of logistics in planning. They didn't have to deal with chicken. They didn't have to deal with, biohazard. They didn't have to deal with that liability burden of patients. They would just carry organs in their backpack, like a bladder or a kidney or a colon. Well, literally.
Let's clarify. Hang on. They would carry a 3D printed bladder or colon in their backpack that you made for them.
So we created synthetic soft tissue replicas of organs that were representative of their target patient. So it wasn't the patient. And then the sales and marketing teams would leverage these tools to empower training, doing it safely. And it helped them drive their top line and also reduced costs, right, of all the expensive stuff that they were doing prior to our existence. So I really like that sort of secondary market that I identified, and I was able to build really good relationships with my customers. Those early customers became our supporters, our advocates, and actually funded the company through revenue. Yeah. And so we got through that initial hump. Anyways, long story short, 2018 FDA came out with this guidance document that said what we were building is actually going to be regulated. And so we were like, this is interesting. What do we do now? And so we were really scared and really ended up collaborating with so many great people on the regulatory front and societies too that guided us in this journey. And so years later, we were able to get the core technology, which is the patient-specific models, on the market as a diagnostic FDA-cleared device where it's obviously bespoke. So it's, for the upcoming care of the patients. And we launched in urology. That was 2 years ago.
So I'm going to break in and just do a tiny bit of layman's decoding.
Sure.
So I think what you just illustrated is that Lazarus 3D takes a specific image. They do imaging of a particular patient who's about to undergo some sort of surgery. And then the company can print a replica, a scale model of whatever body system will be operated on, and give it to the physician to practice on or look at or utilize prior to surgery. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Correct. And so it's to rehearse for that upcoming case.
Okay.
And so that's the technology that we were building all along.
Right.
And then we created that secondary market. So now the two kind of go hand in hand. And that journey really was, I think, just perfect, unplanned, but perfect because one helped the other grow. And early on, though we didn't know that this is how it was all going to happen, we knew what the vision was and we stayed true to that and we were committed to the mission.
And so this is kind of a really side question, but if you're building a model, why would the FDA get involved? Because it has nothing to do with your internal body or a drug. I don't understand.
No, that's a great question. So it's because surgeons are using these synthetic organ replicas of their patient to guide decision making for what they would be doing. So if they have created a plan, but there is uncertainty because of the high risk, right, for specific procedures, even a highly trained surgeon would anticipate risk, right? So the ability for them to exercise their plan on the organ replica of their patient for that upcoming procedure allows them to pivot if said plan didn't go so well. And so then they can try different approaches, right? So this is unprecedented for the power that it gives to the surgeon in their hands is really very impactful in driving the care of that patient. So that's why it is considered a device. Similar to even just looking at the MRI of the patient, right? That is an image. It is not utilized, surgically in the care of the patient, but it is how surgeons are diagnosing the patient in the first place. The technology that enables that is FDA.
Okay.
It's a medical device too.
Yeah, I did not know that. Thank you for that education.
No, it's good. It's always so fun to learn. So sometimes we have guests who come on here who are really in the kind of later stages of their career, but you've had this fascinating arc and you're still kind of just getting going. So I typically we ask now, what advice would you give your younger self? And I'm going to ask you that question, but I also am curious to know how you will harness that power as you move forward into whatever is next.
Yes. When I was younger, I think I was very type A, right? And I mostly still am. But at that time, I had created a roadmap for exactly how my life should have been and what the steps were towards it. So I knew I wanted to, be a scientist. I knew I had to go to grad school for that. And when I decided, I narrowed down that I was really interested in genetics, I knew exactly what I had to do, post Ph.D. And I just created this entire roadmap for what company I wanted to be at and everything, to perfection. However, I don't think that's a really great strategy. I think you need to have the fluidity to embrace, what comes at you, what opportunities you may not have even anticipated, or what opportunities you might create, right? 5 years or 10 years from now, there may be jobs that we have not even anticipated with where we are, AI is advancing so many things, automation, and just the pace at which it's happening is unprecedented. So where we will be in 5 years, I cannot tell you today what that would be, what job I would have, right? And so having that, even though it's ambiguity, embracing it and having that flexibility is really important. I didn't have that at the time, but I would advise myself to think differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that funny? My mom and dad always tell a story when I was probably 4 that I was crying one day. My dad's like, "What's the matter?" And I said, "I don't know if I want to be a ballerina or the first woman president." And I don't think either of those two are going to happen. But again, it's being open for the options. And again, we talked about leaping. Yeah, we always close up our interviews with hiring for good and what that term means for you. So what does it mean?
I think I love the phrase hiring for good. I think it is so important to look at what your needs are today and to try to anticipate, is this hire a good fit for the long haul? Because at least in a startup, early on, you are just doing so many different things and wearing so many different hats. And as we evolve, there might be a shift, and there might be more specialized tasks that you're focusing on. So when you're hiring for good, you are proactively anticipating that long-term opportunity to work with the candidate. And I think asking the candidate, like vetting them on that element of it is really important. Yeah.
I love that because, again, we talk about it all the time. It's the alignment of those goals, values, mission, vision. And it's not just skill set. It's the softer.
Well,
what makes us who we are.
What we know is that if a candidate does not align culturally with an organization, it's just not going to work in the long run. And so, a great deal of our work in executive search is spent kind of making sure that there is that alignment. And then the other, of course, the skill set, the pedigree, all of that is very important as well. But the kind of softer, more nuanced aspects of, like, I would even say, alignment, and then that other percentage that's going to elevate or help the organization get to where they want to be is the other kind of secret sauce, right?
I will say, like, as a founder, I don't think you're going to find the people that are as passionate for what you're building, right? But I think if they can come close to it, or if there is a drive from within that really it's impact driven and it's meaningful to them, then you will find that alignment. Finding those people is also not easy. I think it's a very arduous task. And I think I've had my fair share of learnings. So yeah, I think I'm still learning actually, and still growing from those learnings. So I think it's really interesting, how many pieces of the puzzle you have to factor in. Like right at the beginning, it's like chess almost. And you have to anticipate those next phases of your growth and whether this person is a good fit. So I don't even know fully how you assess that right now, but I'm working on it.
Awesome. Well, you can call us. But anyway, well, this was just lovely. Thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful to have you as a guest. And I know our audience is going to be really excited about all the great wisdom that you shared today and just kind of your incredible journey as well.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, both of you. Really appreciated it.
Yep. Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.